This is the Future Talk, electrifying mobility at scale, cities leading the way. Please welcome to the stage Goswami from the Economic Times.
Good evening and welcome to this session on electrifying mobility at scale, cities leading the way. There's no gainsaying that today about 45% of people live in cities globally, and the figure is going to only go up. The percentage is going to go up. So if we really want to solve problems of sustainability, climate change, pollution, what have you, we have to be looking at how we move ourselves and goods in a city. But let me not prattle on and on. Let me invite the people who actually know something about this. So I first invite Senator Anjes Tjarks from the Ministry of Transport and Mobility Transition, Hamburg, for a keynote presentation. And over to you.
Yeah, thank you, dear Umi, dear ladies and gentlemen. I want to give you a brief overview of our scaling up the electric mobility on the streets. And I'll try to do it really quick and to keep the figures down, but I need some figures to explain our pathway. So if you look at the left side from your perspective, you see the modal split in how it developed in the city of Hamburg, and you see the gray bracket, and you see in 2008 we had 39% of the modal split was done by cars. So now we're at 29. It's a 10% decrease, and we want to come to 20% in the end of the decade, which is quite ambitious, I need to say, but I think the way is clearly pathed. And on the other hand, you see our climate reduction goals is minus 70% by 2030. What is our key performing indicators to reach these goals? On the one hand, or first of all, we need to reduce within the city individual vehicle mileage. We will not see it so much within the economy. Here we plan on a growing mileage, but the individual personal mileage needs to be reduced. And in the past, we were quite successful with this. You can't see it on this chart, but starting from the year 2000, we decreased the city traffic on our city streets by about 20%. And it's not only these 20%, at the same time, we had a population growth of about 16%. So the population grew a lot and the car traffic was reduced. The second big thing we obviously need to do, and we're talking about here, we need to electrify our vehicle fleet, the bus fleet, the cab fleet, I'll come to this in a second, the private car fleet, and all the other fleets. And at the same time, obviously, we need to build up the electric infrastructure to electrify all these cars. And however, not only the cars, so the infrastructure and the energy is actually key, because you also needed to electrify the building infrastructure, the industry, and at the same time the car fleet. And therefore, those are the three key performing indicators we've got. In 2010, we proclaimed that from 2020 onwards, we will only or almost only buy emission-free buses. And we did this as a city, and you can see it on the next chart. The green chart says, okay, we're at about 40% of our bus fleet is electrified at the moment. Hamburg is, in Germany, the largest bus operator in the country. So in Germany, we have about 40,000 city buses, 2,000 are operated in Hamburg, and the fleet is electrified by about 40% at the moment. And you see, it's rather, we have some problems in electrifying the truck fleet. We are only at 3%, and we are a bit better, but it must be a lot better in the individual car fleet. We are at 9 to 10%. Where we are a front runner, we electrify our cab fleet. So in Hamburg, you are only allowed to get permission of a new cab if it's emission-free. And therefore, this is the only scheme in Germany where we actually kicked out the combustion engine completely from a a complete car fleet. And at the moment, we have 760 electrified cab vehicles out of 3,000. If you look at the numbers concerning the individual car fleet, you can see something that we're at 70,000 cars at the moment that are fully electric in Hamburg. And you can see, and what this is more important, we are in an exponential growth rate. So we saw, and maybe I can say this in a sustainability conference, every time the US president is trying to do something, for example, waging a war because of oil, it actually happens the opposite. So the oil prices got a lot more expensive in the recent past. And therefore, you can see, for example, in March and as well also in April, we had a growth rate by over 100% in year-to-year electrified growth of the fleet. The second to last chart I want to give you in a brief overview is that obviously you do not only need the vehicles, but also the electrified charging infrastructure. You can see here that from all German cities, we had the strongest growth in charging infrastructure by 40% last year. And obviously, you need to have both a growing electric fleet and a growing charging infrastructure. If I may add one thing, it is not only the charging infrastructure. In Germany, we have the problem that the charging is not, in my opinion, not transparent enough. So you do not always know what is the price of your charge, of charging the electricity when you go onto a docking station. You only know it when you're there and not beforehand, and therefore competition is not high enough, in my opinion. And in the end of the day, and I want to conclude with this, obviously the city can't do it alone. If you want to be successful in the path to climate neutrality, if you want to be successful in the path of mobility transition, you need to have efforts both in industry, actually also in civil society, and also in politics. Thank you so much for listening to this brief overview. It's your stage again, Omi.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anjes. And that was super interesting. The thing I really liked was the first graph where you show that, you know, your walking trips and public transport has gone up. And that's amazing, because when we're talking about electrifying mobility, we often think in terms of, you know, converting our ICE vehicle into an EV. And it's not that, you know.
Not at all.
Not at all. It has to be all of the above, and actually much more public transport. Because imagine if our cities got more crowded, that means more private cars. It means it'll take us forever. And believe me, I live in New Delhi. I know what it means.
Yeah, it's a bit more crowded than here.
Yeah, I mean, in London, I had to take a car to get to the airport because it was a very hot day, and you know, there were a problem with the trains. It took me 2 hours from the city to the airport. So yeah, that's 2 hours of my life I'm not getting back. But that's you know. But thank you so much for that presentation. You know, the thing about urban mobility is we think in terms of, it's easy to think in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. We talk about it, but it's much more than that. It can not only address climate change, it addresses health, accessibility, safety. You can use public transport and walking and other forms to improve safety in your city, create opportunities for business, increase women's participation in the labor force. We forget about that sometimes, and create opportunities for local businesses, and of course, build local manufacturing. I believe Hamburg is a hub for electric manufacturing, like electric vehicle component manufacturing. So I suppose there is something there. But as I said, as we have this discussion at the start here of the UN Decade on Sustainable Transport, you don't want to keep hearing what I have to say. So let me invite, without much further ado, the panelists. We have Mr. Glenn Schmidt of the BMW Group. Please come up, sorry. In the middle. And please, sir, if... So I'll start off with you, sir. You saw a bit of the presentation, or you just missed it because you came from a meeting. Always happens in things like this. But I mean, broadly speaking, I kind of recapped what had happened about how Hamburg is moving ahead with, electrifying urban mobility, which is not just about more EV cars, but about public transport, walking. They've done a great sort of effort, and it shows. I'm wondering, from the perspective of developing countries, Africa, how do you see this whole concept or idea of electrifying urban mobility?
No, thank you so much. My name is Tich Simbini. I work for the African Union Development Agency, and allow me to convey apologies from our CEO, Ms. Bekele-Thomas. This is a subject that is very close to a heart, and so from the African perspective, I'm sure Africa is not one country, but it consists of 55 countries. So the experiences vary. So I think the most advanced country that is really driving e-mobility in urban areas you find is Ethiopia. You know that they've legislated the ban of internal combustion cars now, and then they are working to develop the EV charging infrastructure within Ethiopia, and also they are regentrifying the cities so that they can enable citizens to cycle and to walk. And you see the effect of that when the government takes the leadership, that there is a high uptake of electric vehicles. Now you've got the government partnering with the private sector to build charging stations. And then you contrast that with South Africa, where this is mainly being driven by the private sector. And I think going forward, as we continue to evolve and to see the different results, through AUDA, what we'll then be doing is that we'll be working with our different member states to learn from those experiences, and of course, through our partnerships with the German government through BMZ and GIZ, and also the city, we can then also learn from the experiences so that we can then be able to replicate the successes across the continent. So those are some of the experiences that we are seeing on the continent, and which would be helpful for this discussion. Thank you.
I will come back to you because, as you rightly pointed out, Africa is not one country. Sometimes people tend to forget that, right? We keep saying Africa, but and there is a wide variety. And I will come back to you for the complexity of what it is to be a country on the African continent dealing with this, because they're in different stages of development. Well, I'll come back to you for that. I want to turn to Glenn Schmidt with the question about what does industry need to contribute to the electrification, and what is it that you expect from cities? Is it just easier working with cities?
I guess it really depends on what city you're working with, right? If you're working together with the city of Hamburg, then I can say, yes, it is in fact a very good experience. I think at a very basic level, what is the responsibility of a car maker like BMW? I think it's to make products, right? If you think about the newest electric vehicles that are on the market right now or are being introduced to the market, and I'll take the BMW iX3 or the BMW i3 as an example, the task that the engineers received is to come up with a vehicle that has really no inferior characteristics compared to an internal combustion engine, right? So if you're used to being in your ICE vehicle, and you say, I can't drive an electric vehicle because of the range issue, then you could say, well, that's no longer an argument because an iX3 has a range of over 800 kilometers in the WLTP circle. If you say, well, I'm used to going to the gas pump and being able to tank up very, very quickly, then we can say, well, with an electric vehicle with fast charging, you can get significant range within 10 minutes, over 300 kilometers. So that's no longer an excuse. And I think this is, the one obligation that we have to come up with products that have superior qualities. At the end, it's a customer process as well, having products that are appealing, that in the case of BMW, you can show off with, right? So drive an electric vehicle and be proud and show off on the vehicle. But I think when it comes to working with cities, what's important is that it's a coexistence, it's a mutual activity. And if I can maybe take the example of Hansestadt Hamburg, in 2017 here in the city, we had a car sharing offering with Drive Now. And then we introduced BMW i3, not the one that's coming on the market, but the first series electric vehicle that we had on the market. And that helped to promote the vehicle. People saw it, they could try it, they eventually could buy it as well. So I think this is, an important point, work together. The other point, and you can't really stress this enough, is the availability of charging infrastructure. This is a really important point. And I think congratulations to Hamburg. You've done a fantastic job in terms of ramping up. But even in the case of Hamburg, it's not over, right? You're still ramping up. You still need more. And we're having a massive push towards electrification. And electric vehicles are the way to go. But we need more infrastructure, more charging. It gives you a psychological benefit for people who are saying, can I make this step? Yes or no? And it's really one of the last barriers that we need to be working on. So I think this is important. And beyond that, maybe we come to some examples later. I think our understanding at BMW is the car of the future has a place in the city, right? And my understanding is that Hamburg still wants to see individual mobility in the future, that you can live in coexistence. And we work together with Rotterdam, for example, have a strategic partnership, because there's also that understanding of coexistence between cars and city transportation. But then you need intelligent measures as well. We, for example, in Rotterdam and entwickelt, sorry, that's a little bit of German coming through. We developed now I've lost everything. Jesus. Okay. We developed a geofencing for plug-in hybrids. So if you're driving your plug-in hybrid in the outskirts of the city and you come into the city center and in a low emission zone, then there's a signal that's sent to your car and the car automatically turns into electric driving mode. And that worked in Rotterdam, and now we've introduced it to 140 cities around the world, including Hamburg. So these are examples of small innovations where you can sort of nudge and work together collaboratively. And I think that's the key going forward.
Okay, when I come back to you, I want to ask you about, on one hand, you remember the chart in the beginning, by 2030, the share of passenger cars goes down.
Yeah. How
do you sort of balance that with, being a car company? And where do you see the future there as in BMW's contribution to urban mobility or car companies? So I'll come back to you with that. But
that's a big question. So thank you for giving me some time to think about it. You're not going to hear that way I want to have less cars. So, okay. Okay, good.
You do know that all the talk about your cars, I have to take your word for it, because I have to find a new job to afford one of your cars. So I'll now come to Anjes. And I want to ask you this. Yeah. One is, what do you need from industry to actually make your plans come true? And what is it? How do you think that collaboration works? And I have another little question for you. It's not enough to, have Hamburg become this oasis of great urban electric mobility. Mm-hmm. We need that to percolate through other parts of the world. Mm-hmm. Cities where actually most of the population will be living, in developing countries. What do you think Hamburg can tell the world, to these countries? Help, not just tell. Help as in show the way or something or the other.
Okay, and you want to have the answer in 30 seconds, right?
Yeah, always.
First of all, I think Mr. Schmidt and we are very much aligned on one point, that we need car companies to build cars people want to buy. And we want to have them electrified. That's a very important part, because if we want to be climate neutral, if we want to have quieter streets, we can talk a lot about mobility transition, but at the end of the day, there was also in the most advanced cities with mobility transition in Europe, there will be individual car traffic. And the question remains if it's electrified or if it's not electrified. And it will only be electrified if people want to buy electric cars, and therefore you need to have the models to have them. And I think this is not what we can tell as a city to the world, but also for the developing countries, we need car companies to build cars that are affordable and that are pleasable for people in in these countries. I won't even say developing country, because we just said 55 countries in Africa, they have probably different needs, they need to have. But you need to build cars people want to buy. The second thing is you ask about collaboration. Yes, we need collaboration with all kinds of companies, and therefore also you will challenge Mr. Schmidt in a second. So I'll just give a hint. I think it's not only also concerning car companies about unit economics, but also about the question: do you want to develop not into a service company? That would be a bit too much, maybe. But for example, Mr. Schmidt said BMW started Drive Now, which is a car sharing in Hamburg. And I mean, it's about selling rides. It's not about selling a car. It's about selling a service. So the question is it more about selling services within the city in the future? And selling services is also bus ride, but it could also be a shared bike ride or a shared car ride. And what can we tell the world, or maybe give as a hint? I think the whole question about electrification of all paths, meaning vehicles, industry, and buildings, is key. And if you want to become climate neutral, it is actually not the most fancy thing, but the most important thing is that you bring the electricity in the city. It's just building the infrastructure. It's a pretty boring part, actually.
But the necessary one.
Yeah, it is not the necessary, it's the precondition for everything else.
Right.
And that's what I wanted to point out. The precondition for everything else is the most boring part, actually.
Always is, because the shiny things look nice, but the hard work
is working at the core.
Exactly. I want to come back to you once again on this question of electrifying mobility in cities in developing countries. Now, of course, as you rightly pointed out, developing countries are various shapes, sizes, forms, and capacity. But I come from India, and I live in Delhi. We have a metro, which is electric mobility. It's a nice, shiny thing. I know Addis Ababa has a metro, and many of these places have, but it doesn't constitute mobility the way we see it in Hamburg, seamless from one to the other. Besides high upfront costs, what are the big challenges?
I think the most obvious one for Africa, I mean, we are grappling with 600 million people who don't have access to electricity. Our grids are unstable and unreliable. And we need to start to build that capacity. And so as the AUDA and the African Union, we are working towards the establishment of a single electricity market on the continent. I've just come from Brussels, where we were meeting with the European Union with all the 5 power pools on the continent to pitch our strategy towards how we can address the electricity infrastructure problem on the continent. So that's the first thing. If we are going to introduce electric vehicles, for example, that's a huge load that we are introducing into our systems. And the current systems can't absorb the demand. So we are looking into the future and then making sure that we develop that infrastructure in terms of having that reliable electricity supply. The second thing that we're also looking at is when we are developing those electric infrastructure, we are now looking at the load, the productive use, and the opportunities that come from the manufacture of batteries, electric vehicles on the continent becomes another opportunity for creating employment and industrializing, a pathway for industrializing the continent. So we are looking at it from that dual perspective. First, creating the enabling environment. Secondly, creating opportunities for industrialization through the uptake of these technologies on the continent. Thank you.
What's interesting is that the issue of grids and the issue of electricity backbone, as Anjes said, is something that even cities in countries that are richer and wealthier also face. So it looks like a shared challenge. Huh? So who says we don't have shared challenges? Do you remember the question I asked you?
I kind of blended it out. Can you repeat it?
Yeah.
I'm just joking. Yeah. No, I do remember it. I mean, you were referring to a chart where you clearly see in Hamburg a reduced number of cars and a reduced amount of individual mobility. And I mean, that may apply to Hamburg, but I think we need to be looking at this at a global and also at an industrial level. I think the first point is individual mobility is here to stay. There are many people around the world that choose to have individual mobility. Secondly, the automotive industry is an important industry. It's a key industry. And we see that there are a lot of burgeoning economies that want to have an automotive industry, or we have economies that have a strong automotive industry. And you have to ask yourself the question, why? And the answer is the automotive industry is a systems integrator. You know, it combines so many different other industries. You have chemistry that goes into it. You have steel, aluminum, you have plastics, you have electronics, you have intelligence, artificial intelligence going more into the vehicles. You have services, right? And this has been the basis of the success of the German model, that you have a strong automotive industry. And if the automotive industry is strong, then you have prosperity, right? So I think we need to understand that to a certain degree. And that means we have new competitors. And that means we need to face competition in the eyes and say, let's compete on a level playing field. That's important. Now, having said that, I think you can learn a lot from cities like Hamburg, but Hamburg isn't Germany, and Germany is not Europe, and Europe is not the world. Don't forget, right? So we can be learning and ramping up, and electrification is the best way to decarbonize, right? I always say this in my role as sustainability officer. This is the hard currency of reducing CO2. Why? Because most of the emissions are during the usage phase, right? And if you're charging the vehicles with green electricity, then you're dramatically dropping. So that's the best way to decarbonize. But don't forget about the world around us. We have 240 million internal combustion engine cars driving around in Europe that are emitting as we speak. So why not decarbonize the fuels as well? It's not really an either or, it's an altogether type of solution on top of that. And I think Hamburg has done a great job, but you made an allusion to an automotive industry in Hamburg. Yeah, I don't know how much there is, right? But we need to, there's none.
And just a small Mercedes factory.
Small, okay.
Components, right? I think, right?
Components, yeah.
More components, yeah.
Components, yeah. So I think this is important, and we need to be thinking about how can we scale and do things. And I think there's a big opportunity for Africa. Let's be honest. Africa, this is one of the big issues here at this conference, how often we forget Africa. And China has scaled up on a lot of these technologies, right? And you have economies of scale. So the advantage could be that India is profiting from this, and then Africa as a perspective as well, that you have the economies of scale so that you can leapfrog and then don't go through the internal combustion engine ramp up that we've had in the West, right? Go straight to electric mobility and to software solutions, et cetera, and sharing economy. That's the big opportunity there. And there's a lot to learn, but I would caution to say, let's just get rid of cars. That's just too flat of an answer.
Oh, no, I am all for having cars.
Yeah.
I just beg everybody not to take them out every day for every trip. Take them out, have them. Take them out when you need to, but not every day and not for every trip. So that way we can all live happily ever after. We can have more public transport, more walking, and more cars when needed.
One person said to me, BMW, it stands for Bavarian Motor Works, but BMW in that sense can also stand for biking, metro, and walking. Yeah.
There you are.
Yeah.
So BMW is the unifier in that sense. Well, more power to BMW. Anjes, I want to come back to you finally on this question of managing the various parts. When we're talking about urban mobility, electrified urban mobility, it's also about convincing people that, it's good to have your car. Please don't take it out every day. Please use the public transport, or don't go for an ICE car, get an EV. How does that play out?
You mean, how does it work?
Yeah, how do you make it work? Clearly, you have done something, right?
I hope so. I think at the core of every policy is political will and courage. And it does not only play out for mobility transition, it also is about industrial transition, it is about foreign policy, it's political will and courage, and I think leadership as well. So the question is, do you have a clear vision on how mobility in your city is supposed to look like, because in a city it becomes very down to earth. If you redo a street, the people live there and use the street every day, and then they'll check if it will work out or not. So the question is real, and you need to have a vision, the will and the courage. And in the end of the day, I also agree, obviously there will be individual mobility, also individual car mobility in a city like Hamburg or in other cities. But however, the transformation is an ongoing process. And if you watch at our neighbors, for example, the Netherlands or Denmark, if you look to Copenhagen, for example, it took them 50 years to redo the city, and the same is in Netherlands. They do not used to be a biking country all day long. It used to be completely different, and therefore the question is if you can change it. And the key, if you win this change, is the question, and we're not there yet, is if also in the end of the day the opposition in a democratic country agrees at least on the general scale of the way. They don't have to agree on everything, but on the general scale. And we're there for public transport in Hamburg. So if I'm now building a new subway, I think the wide majority of the parliament would say, okay, that's okay. If I build new bikeways, it would say it's the governing coalition plus one party, but there also is opposition to it.
Right. Thank you so much. Now that we have spent some time talking, discussing, we need another perspective. And I invite Selma Bishwish, youth delegate to the HSC, to address, simple questions. How do you see this in the context of just transition? And what do you think of this idea about cars and beyond cars? Oh, come up. There's a mic, pro mic. Oh.
There's the mic.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I appreciate your inputs. Well, before starting this conversation, I would like to say that I'm an activist, so expect my Gen Z dramatic reaction, which actually also is realistic. I'm gonna speak from a logical perspective. I'm not an expert here. So around 6,055 million of the world's population is unfortunately not having access to electricity, which makes around 8 to 9%, unfortunately. And with that being said, when we're trying to raise this kind of new justice, which is electrification, I think my point of view would be electrification should be benefiting everyone, and not only the urban wealthy cities where people can afford electric cars. I'm coming from Algeria, which means I'm going to be speaking from a global South perspective. I used to live in Lebanon, and when I was studying in American University, and it was pretty weird because I was in my campus, I had everything because it was American property, and then the moment you go out of campus, literally no electricity, no nothing. So I felt like I was living in two different worlds. And as youth future leader, I don't want to see this happening, honestly. So if I want to push for something, I would push for literally electricity for all. Then I'm going to suggest electric cars and whatever sophisticated things we're offering here. Again, I'm not the expert. So my point that I'm trying to raise here is that if we're trying to offer something to today's societies, they should be more affordable, more accessible, where everyone gets to try them and not only limited for only a very small category of people. In terms of policies as well, when I say policies, I like the word you say, will, political will. I have three terms to mention here: political will, also economic status, and also mindset. If you want to bring up this kind of ideas and projects, which I feel they're amazing, I do agree with you that it's amazing. However, you cannot convince someone from a low income family or housing to actually embrace this kind of projects and be happy about them. And even like governments, we cannot somehow be pushy and work on really convincing people that actually this is something that should be, that we can try it out. So that's why policies, if you want to speak about policies, I think they need to focus more on having discussions and dialogues and even like making policies on how they can invest more on buses, for example, and not like private cars where only a small group of people who will have access to it. Why not buses that can benefit remote areas? Why not implementing this kind of projects in remote underserved areas? I believe this will actually help a lot of people who cannot afford electric cars to still try electric transportation, and that can be through buses. Why we're not exploring this kind of options? And this is actually a random question that any person in my shoes would actually ask it. This is regarding policies. However, if I want to maybe address it from a youth perspective, which would be my last point, I think also we need to have youth in this kind of discussions. We need to have them proposing suggestions and not like consult them only afterwards. We need to have them really involved from scratch when we come up with this kind of ideas. We need to make use of, we're having so many youth now are obsessed with incubators establishment and startups making, and they have brilliant ideas. Why not really hearing from them, hearing about their suggestions on policy reforms that can be implemented? I believe they can really help somehow in advancing sustainable mobility in a way that benefits everyone. So my actually opinion may sound like very basic, but honestly, I'm really raising this from a logical perspective because we are really neglecting a lot of gaps are taking place in our communities, and I'm going to insist again on the idea of why not creating buses for remote areas where we can expand the charging infrastructure and reliable electricity and still have this kind of solutions for communities that unfortunately don't even have access to transportation itself. I hope my inputs will be taken seriously and maybe you will take them in consideration in your projects forever. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, some of it was what you were saying, the boring part, the part nobody sees about getting electricity in. But, on a lighter vein, I'm looking forward to the day you have BMW for the masses. That's when I'll be able to afford one. So I'm looking forward to that day. But jokes apart, this is a serious conversation. And I'm wondering, what is it that you think your takeaway, what do we need for the transformation, which is absolutely necessary, whether it's electric buses, electric cars, urban mobility. What do we need?
I'll speak about this from the African perspective. I think for Africa, we don't need one solution. If I could follow on from the points that have been raised. If you look at historically, the history of transport, we have horse-drawn carriages, then we had the internal combustion engine with the train, the plane, and you find that as people adopted those technologies, and as Mr. Schmidt mentioned, they became system integrators, we were able to create employment en masse and bring out a lot of people out of poverty. You see that in China, you also see that in India. So from the African perspective, we're looking at the whole ecosystem. What do we need with urban mobility and the opportunities that are being presented with these new technologies as a solution to uplifting many more people through industrialization, through employment creation. And in the process, we are electrifying and also we are empowering them so that we can improve their incomes, so that they can then be able to achieve these new technologies and improve their quality of life. The one last point, the challenge that we have had on the continent is that for a very long time we have focused on single solutions. You look in the 80s, we're focusing on rural electrification, and we neglected investment in power generation. Now we're talking about the energy transition as one issue that needs to be, social issue that has to be addressed. And in Africa, people are even talking about clean cooking. You see, and these are not our priorities. We need to look at the whole ecosystem. How do we uplift people out of poverty using the opportunities that are presented by urban mobility as one of the solutions to finding our broader problems, the solutions to our problems. Thank you.
Mr. Schmidt, I was thinking when I was listening, When we talk about the Industrial Revolution, we think about the steam engine. And so it's always a vehicular thing that's become the symbol when we move from one age to the other, from walking to carriages to, so it's always that. So you're right, cars are not going anywhere, and they shouldn't. But I'm wondering, what is it that you think we need for this transformation to actually be effective and tick all the boxes we need?
Yeah. We are in the midst of a revolution, right? When it comes to individual mobility in the car industry, a lot of the givens are changing, right? We see that China is very strong, that China is setting the pace with a lot of the technologies. We see that the German automotive industry and the established business models are under pressure. So there's change there. And this part of this revolution is just not the steel, right? It's the software, right? It's the digital component as well. And there are a lot of young people, young startups involved, et cetera, right? So there's innovation and dynamism there as well. I think the policy point that you raised is very important. We tend to always have policies in one silo and sort of a quick fix. For example, we need to have cheap electric vehicles and we need to subsidize them, right? But if you do a policy like this, you need to look at what are the actual consequences. We may not be supporting the domestic players, maybe supporting foreign, possibly. And studies also indicate that people who don't have very much income, they need a car that does everything for them. It needs to go on vacation, it needs to have a lot of trunk space, it needs to go a long distance. And ultimately, if you're subsidizing small electric vehicles, these are toys of more affluent households that already have 2 or 3 vehicles. That's counterproductive. But to answer your question, I think the bottom line is we need an abundance of electricity, and that abundance of electricity needs to be decarbonized. That will help the uptake of electric vehicles around the world, because the kilometer-driven electric will be cheaper than the kilometer-driven with fossil fuel energy. It will help impoverished communities as well to do cooking. It will help industry as well. That means the push that we've started here in Germany for renewables is good, but we need to keep on track. And I think the crisis in Iran makes this also quite clear as well. It's the right decision to go in this direction, but we need to be pushing it. And then it's not just the car industry or one industry that profits, it's everybody that profits.
Right. Thank you so much. Anjes, finally to you. You've heard us all. And I'm wondering, and you heard Selma, I'm wondering what you think. You've done a lot in terms of the transformation, but it's a task not yet complete. What do you see needs to happen next?
Well, I want to comment on one of your many thoughts. I can only comment on one. And unfortunately, I will also comment from my perspective, not from your perspective. But you said, okay, there's a difference between the cities and the rural areas. And I would just want to give you the parallelism that obviously in my country, in Germany, it is the same. There are the cities and the rural areas. And obviously the rural areas, in most of the cases, think they're a bit behind. And I think this is the parallelism. However, I think the rural area are the people that benefit most from the push to electrification of life. Why is this so? Because they are able to produce the energy themselves. And that's a big difference. For example, if you live in an apartment in Hamburg or in any other city of the world, or if you live in a single house somewhere where you can just put solar panels on top, and then at least you maybe not produce all of the energy, but some of the energy, and you do not pay grid costs, you just take it as it is. And therefore you can better your life, and it can start from cooking to electrification of vehicles. So this is the whole branch, and this is also what Mr. Schmidt pointed out. And therefore, I think, even though it's discussed completely different in Germany as well, that the rural areas are kind of the more problematic part, I think for them is actually the bigger chance, but it needs also to be taken and thought about it in that way, because in the days we have a big coal plant, I mean, well, you are not able to produce the energy yourself, but this will be the future, and therefore I think you can also try to narrow the gap between the rural area and the city at the same time.
One of the things that we're almost at the end of time, and what comes through is that electrification is electricity is the key. If you get that backbone done, then it'll happen. And cities with their urban mobility create that push in that sense, in some ways, the demand, the push, the conversation. So thank you so much, everybody, for your time and your thoughts and for making this an interesting conversation about electrifying mobility. Thank you so much.